The offseason is in full swing, and while Miami has been quiet so far, there's still a lot of questions of what's happening behind the scenes. Is Bam Adebayo planning to change positions? Can a rival in Milwaukee join the Heat? And what do rival executives think about Jimmy Butler's future? Well, it ain't great, but we'll break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We're going to get to Udonis Haslam's idea for how to improve the team and a potential trade target later on. But let's start with the latest on Jimmy Butler. When asked who would be the biggest star to change teams this summer, the Ringer's Howard Beck reported that rival executives have been buzzing about a potential Jimmy Butler trade for months and predicted that he would be the one that's traded. Are you surprised, David, that Howard Beck went with Jimmy Butler over some of the other stars that have been rumored when asked who's going to be the biggest star on the move?
I'm not. I think, one, it's part of their typical Ringer-esque roundtable where they have a series of questions about the offseason. This was one of them, and it was posed to several writers who all had their own take on the subject. But I think, moreover, it kind of backs up things that we've been hearing. There have been rumblings about Jimmy and potential conflicts with his contract extension for a long time now. The fact that Howard was this public about it is the only real difference here. But it does show that there's a lot of scuttle behind the scenes. A lot of it has been discussed in terms of Miami falling short of what their expectations were this season, the growing concerns about Jimmy's age, and the bigger issue about whether or not Miami wants to pay what is an aging star in Jimmy Butler. So I'm not surprised by this public announcement of executives kind of buzzing about the possibility that Jimmy is likely to get traded. So it's just something that we've talked about. Fans are very emotional about the subject. They're very tied to the idea of Jimmy Butler being a member of Miami for a long time. Jimmy said so as well in an interview with GQ's Rowan Nadkarni. We've talked about this a number of times, but there's enough smoke here where it's pretty close to being a fire, and we're going to find out whether or not everything burns down over the next week or so.
Yeah, when Howard Beck says that executives have been buzzing about this for months, he's absolutely right. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means that executives are wondering how is this going to play out for all of the reasons that you and I have talked about a million times. His age, the contract, the fact that Pat Riley doesn't seem to be even wanting to negotiate at all with Jimmy Butler, and that Jimmy Butler wants all the money and he wants it all right now. And when I mean, you and I have been taught when we hear the word buzzing for months. I mean, we were hearing stuff in January and February before the trade deadline about whatever the Heat do at the trade deadline, there is potentially a even more monumental decision to be made this summer, right? You and I had conversations in the season about exactly the Jimmy Butler stuff. And then Jimmy Butler, through his agent, comes out and says, we want all the money and we want it now. And Pat Riley at his end of season press conference says, I don't even want to have this conversation right now. And then that kind of crescendoed to where executives around the league were saying, yeah, this feels like it's going to happen. If Pat Riley's public stance and Jimmy Butler's public stance are close to their real stances, it feels like it's going to happen. I even got on this show and I got some heat for it, was saying I kind of expect Jimmy Butler to get traded because I think a lot of people around the league, and that was more of an emotional thing. That wasn't me reporting anything, but just that, and that was but that was a sentiment held by a lot of people around the league was, oh, this is not going to end with both Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley with a kumbaya moment and saying, you know what, everything's fine. Let's figure out it felt like it was going to be really hard to forge a future together. I do think that has cooled off a little bit since those initial reports, since Pat Riley's statements in his press conference. It feels like things have cooled a little bit more. There are people around the league that feel like the Heat and Jimmy Butler can hash out an agreement. ESPN's Bobby Marks the other day saying that he thinks that a realistic outcome could be Jimmy Butler getting that extra year, but it's something less than the max. I still have my strong doubts that Jimmy Butler would. He said something like a 2-year, $80 million extension that would basically pay him $40 million a year. And I'm like, I still don't see Jimmy Butler giving up $53 million. Not next year, but the year following, which is what would have to happen. He would have to decline the player option, which is worth $52.5 million. And he's going to replace that with a $40 million contract. I have my doubts that he's going to take a $12 million haircut.
The total of the max extension is what, 100 and something million, 113 million?
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
he'd be giving up $33 million, which is really hard to do. That's really,
and people say, well, the aggregate value, if he took the 2-year $80 million, he'd be making another $28 million. And I'm like, he can make that in free agency if he doesn't tack on that extra year easy, even at age 37 years old, like with the cap going up and everything the way it is. I think $28 million might be the minimum he could make, even as a 37-year-old, 36-year-old free agent. So,
is this just Tuesdays in Miami, as Udonis Haslam always says? There's conflict, there's always tension. It's not the kind of overt tension that we see like manifest on the court, like when Jimmy yells at Spo or when Spo yells at somebody else, the kind of friction that comes with highly competitive people in a highly competitive workplace. But is there something more to that? And this is might be why it's cooled off a little bit. The season ended badly. Jimmy was hurt. He was clearly frustrated. Also, again, clearly buzzed when he said those comments about if Boston had played, I'd be out there. And then Pat Riley took umbrage to it, and as well as he should, because it's insulting to the rest of the players that were actually available and were actually trying their best against a better Celtics team. And then they kind of just had their public statements. It was a public kerfuffle, if you will. But now that things have cooled down a little bit, as you said, is it just a matter of like, all right, now cooler heads are prevailing a little bit. We said what we did. We're frustrated. Neither of us really want this situation to end, but we have to find some kind of tenable middle ground here.
I think that's maybe part of it. I also think that just time, like the Riley statements don't sting just as much because we've had time to digest them a little bit more. And Jimmy Butler's on vacation, not really doing any public statements other than showing how he's a great poker player and on, playing volleyball in Los Angeles or something, or wherever he is.
He's everywhere right now.
Maybe that's it. This is real. You mentioned the emotional part of this, and it's such a great point because, it's hard. It's hard for even you and I to imagine the Heat, like that we've already seen Jimmy Butler's last game in a Miami Heat jersey. That just seems so hard to comprehend right now. But we didn't think it was going to happen in 2016 when Dwayne Wade left, and he left over money. He left over a contract dispute, nothing else besides the contract dispute. And of course, the emotions that drudges up where Dwayne Wade was the franchise player, and he said, you need to appreciate me like the franchise player. Look at everything that I've brought to this franchise. But boy, doesn't that sound a lot like what Jimmy Butler's point is here? Look at everything I brought to this franchise, shepherding the second greatest era in Miami Heat history, everything I brought to you, and you don't want to pay me. And guess what? Dwayne Wade, when he left for the Chicago Bulls for a big contract that the Miami Heat weren't willing to pay him in 2016, he was 34 years old. Jimmy Butler is 34 years old now. Dwayne Wade played 74 games in his last season before he left. That was 14 more games than Jimmy Butler played last year.
Yeah.
This would not be the first. It would not be it doesn't take, in other words, a stretch of the imagination to see Pat Riley say, "The hell with you. I'm not paying you that money. I'm not doing it." And he's done this
That's
before.
worded strongly. That's worded a little strong. That's a hell with you necessarily.
Right, sure, or the hell with your contract demands, I should say. I'm not paying you.
Sand that he's drawn.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is. You draw the line as an executive. You have a final point. Like you can kind of hedge a little bit. You want to have, again, some wiggle room, but there has to be a certain point where you say, you know what, that just doesn't align with the ethos and the future that we envision. The vision for this franchise is to be competitive, and paying you close to $60 million a year for you to miss a bunch of games over the course of the season with our future probably capped because, again, yes, you had great success over the last 5 seasons, but that was last 5 seasons of Jimmy Butler's prime, of which I don't think anybody can assure is likely to be replicated. So you just have to get to a certain point there. I don't know how it's going to play out, but there seems to be growing buzz. It's been growing for a long time. Something has to get near some resolution because, as we talked about last week, it is the very most important and the first. Actually, it might not be chronologically the first domino that has to fall, but in terms of the structure of how you view this offseason, it has to very much be point 1A. You have to resolve that situation because if not, you have to make trades. You have to be able to draft somebody who can kind of fill that gap. You don't want to be caught in a situation where you're not prepared for the loss of Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that the front office is probably engaging on many different fronts right now, trying to figure out what to do.
You have to know what you're going to do with this Jimmy Butler situation. If my thing is either pay him the max or don't. And if you don't, be prepared to trade him. And I don't think that there's going to be there's not enough of a timeline here to negotiate and haggle over this, because we saw this last summer with Damian Lillard, where they're dealing with this other situation over here, and every other potential free agent signing, every other trade that you could have pursued, all that stuff goes away as the rest of the league operates. The rest of the NBA isn't waiting on you, right? Some of these players that we're about to talk about later on the show aren't waiting on you. And I think it would behoove the Heat to get something done sooner rather than later on Jimmy Butler. And maybe it is just saying, okay, this is a tough decision, but we don't have this was the best years of the Jimmy Butler era, and we don't feel like going down that path anymore. And maybe that does turn into a trade, and maybe Howard Beck does end up being right. So
this is a big question here, and there's no right. And again, I'm going to say right now, we're speculating here. Has Pat Riley contacted Daryl Morey or ready to gauge any kind of potential trade package?
Does he have to? He kind of knows what it is, right? He knows Paul George's there. Like what the Shams report last week was.
Yeah.
Philadelphia's waning interest in Paul George.
They're not interested in Zach LaVine.
To me, I'm more interested in.
That's their best option.
Right. To me, is like, okay, we know that Daryl Morey's over here wanting to pay Jimmy Butler, and he's got 3 first-round picks that we could get. We kind of that's the deal.
Who else?
But yeah, who else? What else? Is there a better option elsewhere, whether it's from Houston or Golden State or some of these other teams that have been rumored? Maybe he's contacted those teams. We've already seen some trades happen. The offseason is starting. Like, we're here, right? With the Giddey Caruso deal, like, it's kicked off. Did Udonis Haslam reveal the Heat's biggest offseason need during a TV appearance? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships. That's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions do apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat talk every day, 5 days a week, even during the off season. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. Before we talk about some of the off-season options that the Miami Heat may have, including a new-ish pick by ESPN's mock draft, I want to get to this sound from Udonis Haslam during an appearance on the Stephen A. Smith show on Friday.
Another big. I look at Bam Adebayo, man. I'm like, I love Bam, but I think you need another big body. I agree. Do you feel with that?
I agree, and Bam agrees as well. I think Bam knows that the center role for him is a role that he can play, but there's another role that he can play as a power forward, and that will allow him to be his best version, and he can mature and grow and step away from the basket and shoot threes and do all these things that guys in the NBA are doing right now. We definitely need a little bit of size when you talk about Joker and B and all these centers that have guard skill sets, but at the end of the day, they're still in a center's body.
Right.
And that wears on Bam. He's 6'9", 6'10", and that wears on him over the course of a season. So I agree with you. We need another big.
So we've heard Haslam make similar comments before. I think to Stephen A. Smith on First Take probably about a month ago, that he thought that the Heat needed to get another center and potentially move Bam Adebayo to power forward. To me, the interesting part of this kind of latest version of it is Bam Adebayo agrees with Udonis Haslam that UD and Bam have had this conversation, and Bam is saying, hey, for me to maybe hit my next level as a basketball player, I need to play power forward. I want to shoot these threes. I want to guard on the perimeter. I want to be a little bit more versatile defensively, be a weak side closeout defender, all these things. That to me is very interesting. And so the difference between the First Take segment a month ago was, oh, well, that's kind of cool that UD thinks that, but that does not necessarily reflect what the front office thinks. And I think even Pat Riley mentioned that during his end of season presser. But I'll ask you this question, David. If Bam Adebayo believes that he wants to play power forward, if Bam Adebayo wants to play power forward, I would imagine he's maybe communicated that with the coaching staff in the front office. Bam is a franchise player. And if he wants to move to power forward, do you think that maybe encourages the team to go in that direction, to maybe prioritize? Not that they haven't tried finding, front court partners with him before, but do they maybe move forward this offseason prioritizing, hey, we need to go find a 7-footer who makes sense with Bam in the front court so that Bam can play power forward?
Yes, I think they have to make that priority, but I will disagree that this has been something that he's discussed with the front office before. I think this is kind of speaks to Udonis's role with the team over years past, when everybody was questioning, oh, why does he have a contract? Why is he taking up a salary cap, etc. This is why, because he has the player's ear in a way that Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra and anybody else in that front office never will. This is purely anecdotal. This is Bam going, damn, I just can't hang with these big boys. They got me out there kind of trying to front Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, and it's killing me. It's killing my knees. I mean, it's taking away at some of my longevity. And he can say these things to Udonis in a way that he can't say to Spo. What does he say to Spo? Put me in, coach. I'm a good soldier. I'm going to do what's necessary. And that's what he's done over the course of his career. So I think this is a little back channeling, perhaps, kind of saying, reiterating to Udonis what he's probably said in the past, so that Udonis makes it, no. Hey, Pat, you got to go out there and get your big man, because this is starting to affect the big man you already have on your roster. And if you're going to trade Jimmy's ass and you're going to try to make Bam the centerpiece of your future, well, you better try to do what you can to accommodate him and not wear him down prematurely, which is something that's happened. Like we heard for years about LeBron James not wanting to play power forward. What does he play now? Power forward. Yeah, that's a byproduct of age, but he didn't want to deal with it. He didn't want to deal with the grind of having to defend larger players, etc. Well, guess what? I think it's starting to happen with Bam Adebayo. Bam Adebayo is not getting older by any stretch, but he's in his 8th year now? And so he has to start thinking long-term. How do I preserve my body on the 82-game day-to-day grind? And this is certainly one way of doing so, of getting that big body. So to your overall question, yes, I think Miami does have to start prioritizing getting the right player to play alongside Bam, which is harder said than done, obviously, because you have to find somebody who can both stretch the floor, unless Bam's three-point shooting, as Udonis alluded to, is a realistic development in the future. And if not, then you're going to have a default of really poor three-point shooting out there in that starting lineup. And I don't think that's something that's sustainable in today's NBA.
Yeah, I think the point of maintaining the body is a really important one. And Bam Adebayo is on the record of this saying, even in the finals in 2023 against the Denver Nuggets, he didn't feel like physically he was at the place he needed to be for the Heat to win the championship, and that a lot of this year was built on him sustaining that physicality that he needs to do. And it's why I've said on this show before, maybe you don't need to go out and get the $20-30 million center who's going to be, but an option, a real 7-footer who could play next to Bam in certain lineups for 7, 8, 10 minutes a game. Even that over the course of an 82-game season could reduce some of that wear and tear on Bam. But this to me is interesting now, because I am thinking about, okay, well, what if you do just get a full-time starting center next to Bam, and it isn't a situational thing, and Bam is sort of redefined as a power forward as opposed to a center? The physicality part of it is really big, and I think that's definitely a priority of Bam if he's pushing to be moved to power forward. But also the expansion of his game. And the other thing that we know about Bam, the league-wide respect, right, that he wants. He wants to be considered a superstar of superstars. He wants to be at that level, on that tier. And right now he just isn't. And part of that is because he has not won a Defensive Player of the Year award yet. Part of that is because he offensively isn't at that level that a lot of guys are at. But you wonder, if maybe Bam is saying, well, if I'm playing power forward, maybe I can be offensively something better, right? I've done the free throw line jumper. I've developed some stuff. I've maxed out what I can be as an offensive player at center, but I haven't come close to maxing out what I could be as an offensive player as a power forward. And the other part, too, is we've always had this question of, well, is Bam reluctant to shoot threes? Is Spo holding him back? Like, what is it? And this to me sounds like, okay, Bam believes that if he was playing power forward, there would be more three-pointers available to him. And I remember talking with Bam and Spo and stuff last year about how, you remember Spo was saying, like, stop worrying about getting those corner threes. The ones that are going to be open for you in our offense are the top of the arc off of those pick and pops, kind of turning those dribble handoffs into three-point shooting opportunities for you. Well, if he's playing power forward, all of a sudden the corner becomes open for him, right? Because now you're moving into different spots on the floor. And that corner three, as we know, is just easier than the straight-on three-pointer from further away. And so if you're unlocking that corner three-pointer, that could turn Bam into more of a threat from three-point range, even if it's just from the corners. I mean, that's a great place to start, is from the corners. And we've seen him hit the above-the-break threes, too. It's not as if he's not capable of that, especially when he steps into them in rhythm. So I like it for a lot of reasons. And if Bam does, I'm at the point now where I'm saying, you know what, take the training wheels off from Bam Adebayo as a three-point shooter. Let him shoot 3 or 4 of them a game. Enough with the one every once in a while. Like, let him be a three-point shooter. Even if he misses them, I don't really care. I'd like to see him take 3 or 4 a game next year and then continually get better at it. But if you put him in the corner, I think that becomes a lot easier. And maybe that decreases the need for that 7-footer in the middle to be a pure three-point shooter. Although I think even in today's NBA, you would like that. You just want everybody to have the ability to shoot threes. So I wouldn't necessarily take that off the table either. But I'm at the point now, David, where I want Bam pushing to be playing power forward next year. If you're the franchise player, if you're the leader of the team, you have the right to say, I want to play power forward, and here are the reasons why. Here's my PowerPoint presentation to the coaching staff and to the front office. Like, here's point 1, point 2, and point 3 why Bam Adebayo should be playing power forward next year. He should do that. He should be pushing for it.
I think this is all setting up to get that unlocked version of Bam Adebayo that so many fans have been clamoring for, because it's all kind of aligning just right with the potential trade of Jimmy Butler, with Bam moving into a more prominent role as the focal point for the team's offense. Like, I want to see his face-up game from the three-point line improve, like driving past fours or big men that get switched on to him, having, maybe a wing pick him up and be just roasted by Bam as he drives to the lane, because we've seen these kinds of things before. Just unlocking those field goal attempts that he was hesitant to do as the secondary or tertiary or maybe even the fourth option on offense. That, I think this is all setting up for him to put up all NBA numbers. When you think about the fact that he's not likely to sign that extension once he becomes extension available, he's got to bet on himself. And the best way of him doing that is by saying, I need a damn ball, and I need a damn ball in a position that makes the most of my abilities. And if I'm going to take over this team because Jimmy's not going to be here anymore, I want it to be at the 4 where I don't have to worry about defending bigger players than I do, and I can just concentrate on scoring, putting up the numbers that everybody's wanted from me. I was playing a role before. Now it's time for me to become the superstar everybody expects me to be. And I think next season is setting up for that.
And if you do move Jimmy, because the one hard part about building a team around Jimmy and Bam is that neither of them have been three-point shooters. So everybody else on the floor has to space the court. And it does constrict you a little bit as to how you could build out the team around him. But if you do move on from Jimmy, now you're talking about, instead of 2 non-shooters being on the court in your most important moments, it's only 1 in Bam Adebayo, and maybe only 1 for now, right? If Bam does extend his game to the three-point line. But all that stuff is true. And I wonder, like, is Bam's ceiling? It probably is at power forward. Could you imagine him, not even offensively, where he's just going to be padding his stats with more threes instead of 2s and stuff like that? Obviously, it'll help. But as a defender now, instead of being this lockdown kind of Revis Island type of defender whose stats or whose impact is almost hard to track statistically, if he's playing the weak side, I mean, Bam's greatest ever defensive play was as a weak side defender coming over and blocking Jason Tatum in the Eastern Conference Finals of the bubble. That's his signature defensive play of his career. That was not sort of what he's been asked to do over the last several years, is kind of like prevent that from ever happening in the first place. Like, as a backside defender, like, that's just not going to happen. But as a weak side defender, he can get those Jaren Jackson Jr. type block numbers, right? Where he's making that impact now and also doing all those other things. And you would still have lineups where
that Jackson doesn't do,
and not fouling out or getting into foul trouble every other night. Like, he would just be a better version of Jaren Jackson Jr., even statistically, I think.
Right.
And so, because I think everybody that watches the NBA closely believes that Bam's already better than Jaren Jackson Jr. But the other part of it too is, and I've said this a long time, is Bam playing power forward easier on him? I think it is. And if you're the Heat and you're rebuilding around Bam now, then your job as a front office is to make your jobs the jobs of your stars easier, not harder. And one way to make Bam's job easier is to move him to power forward, and that does unlock maybe the defensive player of the year potential more than what it's been in the last 3 years. As we've seen, there's a cap to what it is that he's able to prove as a center potentially. And then
Bam VP. Let's start it going right now. See, it hasn't even started yet. We're already rolling that campaign out.
We've got some options and some ideas of how Bam could move to power forward. What is the center that would unlock that lineup? We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, I love sports. Obviously, we're doing this show. We've been doing it for over a decade now. I love them so much. I never want them to stop, whether it's baseball, football. I tried not to watch as much football, but I can't. It keeps pulling me back in, just like Robert, the Godfather 2 or 3, rather. But anyway, as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, new ones, old ones, longtime customers, anybody, with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Let us know in the YouTube comments whether you think Bam Adebayo needs to be moved to power forward or if you think he's best at center. Also, do you think Jimmy Butler is going to get traded this summer? Let us know in the comments. Also, follow us on your favorite podcast app. So some options. If the Heat do make moving Bam to power forward a priority, well, how do they do it, right? They can't just make Kevin Love the center. They tried that. Didn't necessarily work. And that's a great point here to be made is it's not as if the Heat have not dabbled in options to move Bam to power forward in the past, right? But their priorities... Omer Yurtseven, like they've tried, even Orlando Robinson was experimenting with that a little bit in training camp, stuff like that. So in terms of options this summer, though, if they do make it a priority, there was this report from Kevin O'Connor, again from The Ringer, that there are rumblings that the Milwaukee Bucks could trade Brook Lopez this summer as they look to maybe play a more versatile style of defense, which I've been arguing the Bucks should be doing anyway. To me, I would have been targeting Nick Claxton if I were Milwaukee at last trade deadline. Now that becomes a little bit more difficult because he's a restricted free agent. They don't have cap space. That's a Locked On Bucks problem, not ours. But if they do move on from Brook Lopez, we talked about guys that could play next to Bam in the past. He's 7 feet tall. Has been an elite rim protector in the past. Yeah. He could shoot threes, right? What Splash Mountain, right? He shoots threes as well as any center in the league, maybe outside of Karl Anthony Towns. On paper, he makes a lot of sense. Now, whether or not the Heat can actually go out and acquire Brook Lopez is a lot more difficult to figure out. But just the Brook Lopez idea, what do you think?
I'm having a hard time trying to justify a reason not to acquire Brook Lopez. And I think he just ticks so many boxes for Miami in terms of he's still, as you said, an elite shot blocker. Like, I mean, almost 3 blocks per game last year per 36 numbers. Just as good as they ever have been throughout his career. He's still a legit 7-footer. They have not had anyone like this on the roster since Hassan Whiteside in 2017, 18. Like, I mean, it's been a long time since they've had anybody kind of put up these kind of numbers. And there's the added benefit, as you said, of being a 38% three-point shooter, a guy who can legitimately space the floor. And frequently, these are a lot of his attempts come from behind the arc. It could be a reason why he gets played off to a certain extent because there are limitations. Those are challenges that you figure out later on. You talk about options. Miami doesn't have anybody that represents the same kind of optionality that Brook Lopez presents. So if you're looking at his age being a concern,
36 years old.
36 years old. It's a legitimate thing. Like there are concerns that he can continue to play at a high level, but I think he addressed those for the most part last year. He was hurt. There's the possibility of him getting hurt. I think that's anybody in the NBA, regardless of how old you might be. And yes, there's increased possibility of that.
But he's been
his age.
He's been durable.
Yes.
He played 79 games last year, 78 the year before that. I mean, he has played outside of, was it 21, 22, where he had, I forget what injury it was, but it basically sidelined him for the whole regular season. But that was a severe injury. He's basically played 70 plus games every year for most of his career. So
yeah, I'm misremembering it. Yeah, I thought last year was a year where he was beset by injury, but there was other Bucks players. But Yeah, no, he's a great option. I really and a guy who is intelligent, high basketball IQ, would understand
Won a
Spo's
championship.
I was getting to that, but yeah,
Oh, sorry.
absolutely. Like, no. There's just so many different things to like about Brook Lopez on the pro side of things. On the cons, he's 36. That's it. That's it. His contract comes off the books. You can re-sign him at a better deal. Yeah, I mean, his is the last year of his contract. You can re-sign him at a better deal for age 37, 38, assuming he even wants to play. If not, it gives you the kind of salary cap flexibility that so many fans are hoping for. It's just hard to, again, justify not acquiring him. So I think if Miami has any possibility of doing so, I think they should try and pursue it. Now, given that he's making $23 million next year, what's the right trade asset, or is it a 3-team deal?
Well, before we get to that,
like, okay,
you're in terms of the cons. Yes, it's the fact that he's 36 years old. Again, I'm with you on that. Like, it's not just because you could look at it and say, well, you only do that if you're keeping Jimmy, right? And it's like, well, he's in the last year of his contract. If the goal is to move Bam to power forward, then you get Brook Lopez now, and then maybe you draft somebody or figure somebody else out, or somebody behind Brook Lopez that could be groomed to being the next Brook Lopez. But the idea is, no, there's value in just moving Bam to power forward because we want to develop him in that position.
He could be the next Giannis, right? Playing alongside
Bam could be the next, I suppose. Those are pretty high expectations, but yeah, I would be going for it. To your point, at $23 million, the price tag's not bad. You've got 3 guys making around that kind of money: Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson. I don't know what Terry Rozier doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Milwaukee. Tyler Hero, you could argue, makes some sense there. I don't know that that's where the Bucks want to go with their roster. It feels like maybe if they want to get more versatile defensively, adding Tyler Hero isn't exactly the way to do that.
No.
So, but I do wonder if there's something like Duncan Robinson in terms of, okay, well, he's not going to help us defensively, but we always need shooting and spacing around Giannis, and Duncan Robinson would be the best 3-point shooter we've had probably ever during the Giannis era, as good as guys have been in the past. Like, even Malik
Connaughton, erasure. Look at this.
I mean, Pat Connaughton's fine, but he's no Duncan Robinson from 3-point range.
I'm joking. Yes.
Oh, okay. So Grayson Allen was fine, but he's had better years in Phoenix. So I think, I think I would explore it, or maybe it's something that, you move Brook Lopez on an expiring contract to a third team or to another team, and then Miami gets him from the third team, like the Drew Holiday situation. Maybe something like that happens. Maybe it's a 3-team deal outright where somebody sends a more versatile center Milwaukee's way. Brook Lopez comes to Miami, and then one of those bigger contracts goes to that third team. But if I'm the Heat, I'm on the phone with John Horst and the Milwaukee Bucks, and I'm trying to figure out a way, like, hey, we want Brook Lopez. Do we have anything that you're interested in? If not, what third team what are you looking for? And can we get on a call with them to maybe work something out? You got an idea?
Nick Claxton, sign and trade, Brooklyn, a viable trade partner. Nick Claxton to Milwaukee, Brook Lopez to Miami, and Tyler Hero to Brooklyn, as has been long theorized.
So I tried this exact idea in the trade machine last week, and it gets complicated because of the sign and trade with Nick Claxton, and it would hard cap Milwaukee. But that might not be an issue. That might not be an issue for Milwaukee. That hard cap is pretty high. I think what did Keith Smith tell us? It was like $189 million. But that would just be a factor that Milwaukee would have to consider is, do we really think that we are going to be hitting that $189 million mark or not? And they tended not to go above that. So maybe that wouldn't be a concern for them. And they would be getting their center of the future, Nick Claxton, who is such a good fit for exactly what they want to be doing. I love the idea. So that's where I'm at. Other options too. If they can't get Brook Lopez, what are some other options that the Heat that the Heat have? ESPN in their latest mock draft went back to Miami taking Zach Edey at 15. And there's definitely limitations with Zach Edey. You and I have discussed this in our Blue Notebook scouting report on him and all these things. The one thing that he is huge,
big,
and he will protect the rim, and he will move Bam to power forward if you start him. So, and of all the limitations on Zach Edey, I keep coming back to this, and this is not just in terms of the viability of the Heat drafting him, but this is why I think Zach Edey is going to end up in the top 15 in the draft. Is
Yeah.
It's just really hard to find humans that size.
Can't teach height.
Really, you can't. It's so hard. And the NBA is a league that self-selects for height. It is the most important thing when it comes down to it at the end of the day. And I just think that some team is going to be like, it's just really hard to find a guy this big, and we can just draft them. And we just know at the end of the day, some of these other guys might not pan out, but no matter what, Zach Edey is going to be 7'4" with a 7'10" wingspan, whatever he is. He's going to be a huge human being that we're going to have on the roster. And we just have a really hard time finding that elsewhere. And we can just pick it. You're telling me we can leave draft night with one of the biggest players in the league? We can have that. I just think some team, whether it's the Heat or another team, is going to just pull that trigger. And if he's there at 15 and Miami says, we need to move Bam to power forward, here's a really easy way to do it. We can just do it right here and just take Edey. And they have worked out Edey. So if Zach Edey has shown that he's capable of shooting those three-pointers, which, by the way, he has great touch in the paint. Way better touch than Bam. Like natural touch. Like great elite touch in the paint. And his
make
free
the
throw
same
shooting numbers
evolution
are
Brook
pretty
Lopez
good.
has, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he can make the same evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're thinking about a Bam Adebayo future, he's younger. Maybe it's both. Maybe you go get Brook Lopez and you let Zach Edey be be mentored underneath him, groomed under. He's like Brook Lopez, be like, this is how I did it, young fella. As he's looking up at Zach Edey, even though Brook Lopez is 7'1".
Yeah. That'd be a great conversation to witness. I'd love that. I'm starting to come around on it. I mean, it just seems like such a natural fit. Might not be the right idea, but if you're going to try and fill an obvious gap in terms of size, the draft might be just the easiest way to do it. Any other veteran that you could acquire who is already playing in the NBA has their flaws, whether it's age or some others. But if you're looking to fill that, like with legit size, as many people as are saying, oh, Deron Holmes, no offense, or Yves Missi or Adam Bona, it's like you've got legit size. Like Edey is going to fill that gap, and you're going to have some spillover there in that sense. And if you're going to change the defense around, if you're going to change the roster around, and you're going to try and maximize Bam at the 4, he's a good option. I got another name, Nikola Vucevic. Yeah, I've been banging that drum for a while. Chicago has a way of like taking the life out of everybody. So I kind of attest to what we've seen from him over the last few years as just the Bulls being the Bulls and just kind of being the dementors of the NBA and just stealing your spirit. So everything's cold and dead around you. At the same time, like he is 33, but he's still a floor spacer. And I think there would be some kind of like Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez was a cast-off in this league. Like people forget like that. What was it? Half a season he spent with the Los Angeles Lakers where he wasn't particularly good, and that wasn't a very good Lakers team. And then all of a sudden he goes to the Bucks. It's like, oh yeah, I remember what I'm playing for. I'm playing to win, and I have a team that wants to win. Imagine if Vooch undergoes that same kind of revitalization where he's like all of a sudden here in Miami, he's like, in Orlando, I got to see up close how Miami operates, how they do things differently than I ever did in Orlando or in Chicago. Now I get to go to a real team with a real steady, consistent front office that wants to win. That could unlock Vooch in a way that we haven't seen since his all-star campaign with the Magic.
Yep, Vucevic, he's $20 million next year, 21 and a half the year before, the year after that. That's not that much, though. I mean, when you look at some of these other numbers that are out there, that's about the running rate for a starting center, $20 million a year. Yeah. Statistically, he had an awful year for the Bulls last year. But like you just said, and it's such a great point, like it's the Bulls. They all just sort of sucked last year. So like how much of that was like, and some of it was just the 3-pointer wasn't going in for him last year. He shot 29% from 3-point range last year, but was 35% the year before that, 31% the year before that, 39%, 40%, 40%. He's a legitimate 3-point shooter. He's a good rebounder. That's not as big as Brook Lopez, but he's 6'11"-ish. Yeah. Definitely bigger than some of the other options that Miami has had. To me, that's a real name. That would be on my board if I were the Heat. If I can't get Brook Lopez and I'm not a believer in Zach Edey, then like Vucevic to me makes some sense. And could you get him for something cheap considering he's coming off of a poor year? Some people do look at the contract as a bad one. You and I agree. I don't think it's horrible. Unless he keeps playing the way he did last year, then it's horrible. But I would trust him to be better defensively, too, in Miami than he was in Chicago. also.
Yes.
You play him in a drop defense scheme with Bam Adebayo as the help backline defender. All of a sudden, it's sort of the same thing where Brook Lopez was he could get played off the floor in certain systems, but you put him next to Giannis and just play him in drop and just say, hey, your job is to stand here. Don't let anybody get past you. That's it.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier to play that position. So I would call the Bulls about Vucevic. I don't know what it would be. Would it just be Duncan Robinson for Vuce straight up? Would it just be something like that? Like Duncan makes a lot of sense in Chicago for a lot of reasons. They need as much floor space as possible, especially now with Giddey.
They just acquired Giddey. They moved on Caruso. They're looking to move Levine, maybe even to the Sacramento Kings. I think you might have to expand the trade and find another way of making it happen. They're looking to acquire Kevin Huerter from Sacramento in exchange for Levine, so they wouldn't need Tyler Hero necessarily, although it's not like those two couldn't play. At some point, either one of them is a backup or not. You've got your elite six man and Tyler if you wind up trading him. I don't know. I think it would be a
Hero
bad
for
trade.
Vooch that's
it's
not
hard
great
to
value
take.
for Miami.
It's hard to take. Now, if you find something else on the Chicago side or someone else that you can add to that, maybe you start to consider it. I mean, it could just be the salary dump everybody's looking for and kind of get to hit the refresh button a lot sooner. But I don't know. I don't know what Tyler's value is around the league, although it's probably a lot higher than Nikola Vucevic.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Maybe it takes a third team unless the Bulls are over the moon in love with Duncan Robinson and the Heat are willing to make that kind of move. I don't know, but he should be on the list. So Brook Lopez, Nikola Vucevic. Maybe it's the draft of Zach Edey. Maybe they love Khalil Ware, who they also worked out. That could be an option there at number 15 as well. There are reports that Detroit could be shopping Isaiah Stewart. I don't know that functionally that's the same size. He's, again, one of those smaller guys, more of like a Naz Reid kind of power forward than he is like a traditional center. He's 6'8". I like Big Stu just fine, but probably not the exact kind of size that you're looking for in terms of a huge upgrade there. So, but those are just some of the names that are out there. But for now, that'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.